ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
I hear a knock on the door and wonder who that could be at this late at night. I open the door and see it is a young man, and his clothes are the worse for wear. Hello there, traveler. What brings you to my humble abode?
I traveled far and wide to find you, sir. I wanted to ask you something.
Well then, come in and sit down. I'll fetch you some refreshments.
Well, sir, I wanted to ask you about your story from childhood.
Which one? I have many. My time in the Navy. The time my pets all ran away and got eaten. All the time.
I'm sorry, but I was referring to the story that not only shocked and left everyone in awe, but the story that you had as a child on the night of Christmas. That one.
Ah, that one. Are you sure? That one wasn't for the faint of heart. A story that was supposed to alert those of the true nature of Christmas. Instead, the story left great ridicule on my image, put me on the police's radar as the—
But you know that is false. I know that is false.
And how do you know that? Huh?
Well, I had a similar experience.
Oh, have you now? Do you wish for me to tell you that story, because you are afraid of what will happen to you? To tell you how I lived longer than the rest of those poor saps who go unheard and are ignored until their names end up in the obituaries, until the cops come snooping around and asking for names to which will never be answered. The families, if they even live, are wanting closure but will never cope with the facts even if it was told or seen. Sorry for the tangent, it's just that I haven't had much interaction with the outside world since that time. But that was long ago and I'm still trying to recuperate.
But will you at least tell me your retellings of that encounter?
Well, I suppose I could inform you of that time. What is it that you wish to know?
I wonder if it's possible to stop and detain. Or even kill this thing. It follows and beckons me. I can't sleep and I see that thing wherever I go.
Ah, I see. I think this story is best explained at its origin of when I noticed something was wrong. Take a seat and nestle under a warm blanket. This story will be a doozy, a long one at that.
Just don't forget that I want to know the secrets to this thing.
I hear you and I will get to that. This will be a story unlike any other, a story that shows us a glimpse of the unknown. And a glimpse into the cockamamie. This is the Yuletide homicide. Or, what I at least recollect it as. This all started on the 22nd of December. I was a jolly little kid with a loving family, no siblings, and a decent house and neighborhood to live in. My father was a kind-hearted soul and my mother was a worrywart. She kind of kept me from experiencing many things. In retrospect, I think I'm glad of that. I'll explain more about that later. Anyway, my father wanted me to walk with him to get some treats for myself, and some milk and other necessities. He normally doesn't do this, as he tends to lock himself in his study. My father and I went to the grocer. While he picked up the essentials, I wandered off to grab my snacks. As I made my way back, I spotted a man outside, dressed as Santa. He wore the classic red suit, trimmed with white fur, and shiny black boots. Through the window, he smiled and waved. I waved back, but something about him felt off. As a kid, I just assumed he was part of the Salvation Army and was gathering donations to help the needy. That's what my dad tells me, at least. He looked through the windows and window door and just smiled and waved. I waved back just trying to be nice, but something irked me that it was wrong. I shrugged it off and went to my father to pay for all the items we had grabbed. We were walking home and there were kids near the sidewalks, making and building snowmen, decorating it with a bucket for a hat and a carrot for a nose, and some rocks for eyes. I thought it strange to not include a mouth, but to each their own. I looked behind me and noticed the Santa lookalike is gone, maybe he left for the day. I do not know. We were walking up to our home, my dad and I noticed some short-sized people making snow angels and I commented, "Look at those kids making angels." My dad chuckled and told me that
they are just adults with dwarfism, everybody grows differently.
I was in awe of the sight and thought that they are secretly Santa's elves. We returned with our items and settled down. My mom smiled and began cooking for us, while my dad went to his study to work. I ran around the house, occasionally going inside and outside to enjoy the snow and enjoy the warmth after getting too cold. After a little while, the meatloaf was ready for all of us to consume. While we were eating, we were conversing about our days and what my parents' jobs were like, the people that we communicate with. However, there was a knock on the door. My father quickly went to the door. I peeked and noticed it was the same guy from the store. I was confused and had a bad feeling. My father gave a small donation to the man and he went on his merry way. My mother sensed my disturbance and looked at me lovingly.
Don't worry, Daddy's very strong. He'll protect us if need be.
I smiled and tightly hugged my mother. My father returned to the table and joined in on the hug.
What did I miss?
I responded with, nothing. We all giggled and returned to the meal at hand. However, as I glanced out the window while we were eating, I noticed the man dressed as Santa. He seemed to be whispering to one of the snowmen outside, and I swear I saw it shift, just a little, as if it had moved on its own. My mother, oblivious, served me another helping of meatloaf and continued eating without a care. We finished and we all were going to bed. My parents read me a bedtime story and I almost fell asleep. They kissed my forehead and turned off the light, shut the door and walked away, making the floorboards creak quite loudly. I was zoning in and out, but I kept looking at the window, to see the tree branches that house a little nest of birds. They were sound asleep like I soon was. Then, I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. The 23rd of December, 2 days away from Christmas. I woke up and noticed the birds were chirping in the nest on the tree branch, but it seems to have one less bird. I thought it strange but assumed the bird went somewhere to get food. I opened my bedroom door and gleefully ran across the noisy floorboards and went into the dining area. My mother was on the sofa with my father who was happily drinking some hot chocolate we grabbed yesterday. Hi mother, hi father, good morning. They smiled in response and said in unison.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you feeling?
I ran around with a smile. My dad stood up from his seat and offered me to walk with him and walk around town for a nice change of pace. I agreed to that and ran to my room to get the proper clothes for the outing. Once dressed, I came back out and was ready to venture onward into the world. We walked out to the town and we noticed a small playground with a lot of kids playing. Some were making snowmen, some were throwing snowballs, and others were engaging with the playground's utilities. I pointed and wanted to play. My dad smiled and let me join. I ran to the other kids and started to play. My father sat around on one of the cold, wintry benches that was blanketed with snow. I played for a while and then, I noticed the man from yesterday. The same clothes, down to the last detail. Asking people for some money. Some people gave money, some others didn't. My father refused this time. My father called out to me and we left. Father, it's that man wearing the red suit again.
It's just someone raising money.
My dad replied quickly, not meeting my eyes. He steered me away, avoiding the bell ringer's gaze. Behind us, the man's voice called out, soft but sharp.
Merry Christmas.
I turned back. He was staring right at us now, his smile too wide, too still. I noticed no one else seemed to look at him for long. I tugged on my dad's sleeve again, but he muttered.
Come on.
He told me that we needed to grab something he had forgot to grab the last time we were at the store. When we arrive, I noticed the snowmen from yesterday have moved from their original spots. Now, they seem to be guarding the front of the store. My dad and I went in and grabbed some flour, sugar, eggs, vanilla extract and salt. After paying, we walk out of the store and we both notice in the distance the man that was dressed as Santa. I could tell my dad's face was alarmed. He whistled to me and told me to hurry along. I did what he told me and we hurried to our home. We got home and delivered all the foodstuffs to the kitchen and my mom started assorting all the items appropriately. I went to my room to undress the overly burly coat I wore that protected me from the cold. I noticed that there is still only a parent bird and one child bird. I looked out the window and noticed footprints leading to the tree. The nest was empty now, no birds in sight. I ran to my mom and told her. She brushed it off, saying one of the birds must have flown off for food. But when I mentioned the footprints, her face froze. She hurried to the window, her hands gripping the sill. My father walked in, saw her pale expression, and peered outside. Without a word, he grabbed a rusty crowbar and stepped into the cold. My mother pulled me close, her arms trembling. My dad arrived shortly after. He closed and locked the door. He said,
There is no need for alarm. It was most likely some kids playing around or some collegians trying to scare us. The neighbors have the same footprints around their house as well.
I sighed a breath of relief, as did my mother. We returned to our daily activities. My mom was assorting items in the kitchen and cleaning the dishes. My father returned to his study and I grabbed an old VHS player and VHS tape labeled Christmas movie and put them in the living room. I put the tape in and started to watch the Christmas movie and saw Santa and his reindeer. I was so happy to see Santa working with his reindeer to bring joy and happiness to all the good children of the world. He jumped onto the helm of his sleigh and rode off into the sky to deliver all the presents worldwide. The movie concludes and my mom and dad tell me it's time to go to bed now. I yawn and motion for them to carry me. My dad sighs but smiles and takes me to bed. He covers me with a blanket and tells me a short story about his childhood, how when he was young, he and his father stayed up all night to wait for Santa. My dad fell asleep and his father took him to bed, and when he awoke, Santa had already come and gone. I was amazed and wanted to have that experience and told him, let's stay up all night tomorrow to wait for Santa. My dad chuckled and ruffled my hair and kissed my forehead and told me to go to sleep. I waved goodbye and he turned the light off and closed the door. I try to sleep but to no avail. I look at the window and notice that there is no birds in the nest now. I tilt my head and notice the branch tapping on the window. One too many times to not be concerned. I get up and look down the bottom of the window and notice that there are more footprints. What startled me the most was that there was this big print that looked like some ball was moved around and dragged somewhere outside of my vision. I heard some noises inside my house and concluded that it was my mom and dad pacing around the house. I plop my ear onto the door and take a listen. I can't make out what they are saying, but they sound worried. And that also made me worry. I hear footsteps coming to my door and I run to my bed and pretend to be fast asleep. I hit the bed with a thud, threw the blanket over me, and just as I did, the door creaked open. My father stood at the foot of my bed. His boots were still on, so he wasn't quiet in the slightest. He said,
I am glad you are safe.
Then he walked out the door, closed it and left to turn in for the night presumably. Morning arose, I rubbed my eyes and realized it was Christmas Eve. I was excited, but the events of the night prior collided with my current state of mind. It coiled me to such a state of dread that I was unmotivated and unwilling to get up. At the time, it felt weird to be excited 1 minute, then the next completely drained. I remember falling out of my bed to wake up my body and walk to the door. I turned the knob and walked into the family room. My mother was in the kitchen making breakfast. But her face was plagued with trepidation. Like she was stepping on eggshells. I took one step forward and made a loud creak sound and she looked at me mortified. But she was immediately glad to see me and hugged me. I looked at her and asked, "What's wrong, Mommy?" She shook her head from left to right and responded,
Nothing is wrong, dearie. Now, who wants some cinnamon rolls?
My eyes widen. Yes, I exclaimed. I look around and notice Father wasn't around. I turn to my mother who has some cinnamon rolls for me on a plate. I ask her, "Where's Father?" She looks at me and replies,
He is out getting some firewood for the fireplace. He told me you wanted to stay up all night and watch the mystical Santa arrive.
I smile as I remember that conversation. I grab my coat and waddle to the front door. The front door opens and I see that my father is the one opening the door with the firewood in hand.
Someone going somewhere?
I open my hands to hold the firewood to help. But my father's face looks like one of anger. He walks past me and puts the firewood in the fireplace and then goes to the kitchen. Grabs a cup of coffee, drinks it, and goes back outside and around the house. I follow him, but my mom grabs my wrist and turns me to her.
Maybe you should avoid seeing him for now.
I tried to break hold of her grip, but it was useless. I sighed and walked around the house, bored, and returned to my room and looked outside the window and saw my father. I noticed the bird's nest was in his hand and he was breaking the nest into little pieces of wood for the fireplace. I looked on with terror and wondered where the birds would go if they ever returned. I run out of my room and look out the window of the front door. My father passes by, but instead of returning to the house, he goes to the trash can outside and throws the wood in there. I look past my father and notice the Santa lookalike is standing there, and he is just staring. It seemed that he was looking past him and at me. A garbage truck happened to pass by and the man was gone once it had passed. My father walks to the house and opens the door. He looks at me, less agitated it seems, and he ruffles my head again.
Hey, you still want to see Santa later?
I smiled once again and said, "Yes please." I said it a little louder than expected, but he was delighted. He looked at me and said,
Want to go for a walk?
I responded, "Of course." We went out and my mother was standing by the doorframe and waved with a sad look, kind of like a look of guilt. I brushed it off, didn't think of it that much. We passed by the store and noticed that the snowmen looked angry now, and they now have mouths that looked like it was open, trying to say something. The buckets had a red texture on it now. We walked by them and went to the playground. There were only a few kids there this time. I looked around, kind of upset and troubled. I was wary as well, not knowing the true matter of what was to come. My dad noticed something was off as well and said,
Let's go get a big tree so we can hang up the decorations, place our gifts under it, and leave room for Santa to add his gifts too.
My enthusiasm was minuscule, but still pressed on with the day ahead. We went to the store and got a nice-looking tree for ourselves. He and I noticed once more the Santa that was asking for donations. This time, he had a bell and was waving it around somewhat ominously. My dad hurriedly bought the tree and dragged me outside. I looked behind and noticed that he was peeking at us, even from a distance. I was beginning to feel uncomfortable, scared, even. We passed the grocery store, and the snowmen were gone. All that I noticed was what looked to be a big, circular drag mark in the snow. We finally arrived at our house and my father places the tree down on the ground and immediately closes and locks the door tight. My mother, who is visibly worried, rushes over and hugs me tightly. I wish I knew what was happening or even why they are acting like this. I had thought to myself. She lets go and my father pets my head.
Nothing to worry about.
He reassured me. We began putting up the tree as a family. My mother went into the basement to grab some decorations to put on the tree. We all grabbed some decorations and began to adorn the tree with beautiful orbs of light. My mother led me to the kitchen to make some cookies for Santa. We were going to make chocolate chip cookies. She told me they were his favorite. My father continued to decorate the tree by himself and my mother and I went to work by making cookies. It only took us an hour but the cookies were finally in the oven, despite some minor setbacks. As we finished, my father finished decorating the tree as well. We heard some thunder coming from outside and it began to drizzle a little bit, so we didn't put any lights up outside and spent the rest of the day indoors. It was night time and my mother went to bed. She gave me a kiss on the forehead and went to bed. My father and I stayed up, as per our agreement to stay up and meet Santa. A little later, I began to feel tired. I fought the urge to fall asleep. Just then, we heard what sounded like little hoofs on top of the house. My heart and excitement soared through the roof, but my father showed some disdain. I said, "Father, he's here, he's here." My dad prompted me to hush. I thought he didn't want us to know we were awake. But then I heard tapping on a window. It sounded like it came from my bedroom. My father then turned on the fireplace and grabbed the poker residing beside it. I was confused. Why was my father preventing Santa from coming into the house? Suddenly, the front knob tried to turn, followed by loud banging on the door. I ran to my dad and held his leg tightly because I was now scared. I looked out the window and saw red eyes accompanied with a dark-colored cone-shaped hat, staring back at me. My mother came from the bedroom and grabbed a baseball bat and ushered me to go into the basement to hide. My mother led me there after I tried to refuse and my father stayed behind. My mother hid me behind what seemed to be a fake wall, but only in my size. She told me,
Stay here and don't come out even if you hear some weird noises. Okay, sweetie.
She closed the fake wall and hid me there. I heard her go up the stairs and lock the door. I hear a window break and a door break down. I hear my father scream and my mother whelp in fear. I hear loud thuds hit the floor and then cover my ears. Some time has passed, then, silence. I hear footsteps slowly going down the stairs. I hear boots that sound like my father's but I'm too afraid to call out or investigate. The fake wall is removed and it's my dad's bloody face. I was about to scream, but my father held my mouth shut.
Careful. They might hear you. I'm okay. Your mother is too.
A million things were going through my head and I was terrified. But my father held me and carried me upstairs. I saw what I could only describe as a bloody Christmas. There were tiny men draped in a pool of their own blood, melted snow across the floor and red-stained buckets lay on the ground as if a war had taken place. Outside were hooves of what I thought were reindeer, but that was all. There was no Santa. I put my face into my father's jacket, and my mother soon joins us and holds us both.
It's all right. We are safe, for now.
That Christmas night will live in my heart and mind forever, haunting me, tormenting me. The traveler interrupted.
There's no way that this is what happened.
How are you so sure?
Because my family isn't around, except for my mother who is terminally ill. I remember, when you told the world, that you murdered your family just to get rid of this thing, to have it stop following you.
I smirked and responded, "You are a keen observer." I did do that. Now, let me finish my story. The thing is, on Christmas Day, the police had arrived to take a look at the damage and saw the massacre that had transpired. They wanted to know what had happened, but they didn't believe what we had tried to tell them.
So, let me get this straight. You are telling me and my partner, that little elves, who were Santa's helpers, attacked your house. But not only that, snowmen came in and tried to attack you and your family. Did I get that all right?
Hearing him say it made me question my father and mother, but I assumed it must be true because they were injured. And I also saw the elves' corpses on the ground as well as the snowmen that had melted. They took me away from my family and took me to my mother's parents' house. Both my mother and father were institutionalized for the most outlandish story the officers ever heard of. However, ever since that day, I have always been followed, always been looking over my shoulder. I was 16 and during one of my many visits to my parents' asylum, there was a power outage and all the patients' doors were unlocked, chaos unleashed, hell broke out. In the midst of it, my parents came to me and told me something that made my heart plummet. My father looked at me while my mother cried her eyes out.
Son, that monster still follows us, still follows you. It's still out there. Watching. Waiting. And it's after you now. There's only one way to end this, there is a way to break the curse.
My eyes widen and I look at him. How? What do I need to? He cuts me off and hands me a makeshift knife. He then tells me,
You must kill what you hold and love most dearly to you.
Immediately, my eyes well up with tears and my voice becomes very hoarse. No, I can't. I can't do that to you. My father smiles with tears in his eyes and looks at me.
Son, my father passed away knowing full well how this curse works. That was why I went to my study and didn't spend much time with you. When I found out the truth, I knew our time might be finite, so I elected to spend as much time with you as possible, and your mother wanted to let you live your life, despite her worriness.
My mother added more to that.
We want you to live a normal, fearless life. The ultimatum. Our lives for yours. So please, although it comes with a heavy heart, do this for your sake. Do it for us too. We can't stand the thought of this happening to you and your possible family in the future as well.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing, the knife in my hand and my father and mother kneeling on the ground, giving their lives for my own. I couldn't do it. I mean, who could rationally take the lives of their own family? My father rushed me, and instinctively I slashed, and he held his throat as he fell to the ground. My mother grabbed my wrist and she ran herself through and bled. The last thing the two of them did was hold each other's hands as they fled from this reality. I dropped the weapon, knelt down and just lost control. No tear was left unshed. Some orderlies entered the room and saw the aftermath. They rushed me out of there and the entire police force arrived to deal with the aftermath. Eventually, they questioned me as to what happened with my parents and my reason for being there. I gave no response at the time. I couldn't even process the events of that day. The one thing I recall that I kept to myself was that in the window of their cell was a red figure cackling and, to this day, I have never seen that monstrosity ever again. So, that was the Yuletide homicide. The story I relayed to the world. They called me crazy. No proof that I killed them, and even if I did, there was mitigated circumstances like the chaos that transpired, and my misremembering the facts they tried to tell me. So, now, the monster lives on, and what will you do when confronted?
This monster you speak of is the same one as the one that I have been seeing. You don't expect me to do what you did, do you?
I tell him stoically, it was regrettable, yes. But I have been free since then. The choice is yours. Live freely at the cost of a loved one or loved ones, or live in fear, the constant need to look over your shoulder. The choice is yours. It is always your choice. Now, leave and never come back. I don't want your curse to befall me. Suddenly, a loud crash outside the door, shattering the uneasy silence. My heart sank as dread tightened its grip on my chest. Oh no, it's here. Why? Why did you bring it here? What have you done?
The door splintered apart, shards of wood flying as a hideous, hulking figure emerged, its twisted form resembling the Santa look-alike, only far more grotesque. The old man froze, his face twisted in terror. His panic turning into a silent scream as the creature lunged. It tore into him without hesitation, claws ripping flesh and bone. His blood sprayed across the walls, his screams echoing through the house, raw, visceral, and unrelenting. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and bolted, my legs moving faster than I thought possible. I have to keep running, I whispered, breathless, as I stumbled into the snow outside. I can't let it catch me. I can't do what he did. I won't sacrifice someone I love. But I want to survive. I have to survive. Even as I ran, the old man's final, agonized cries burned into my mind, reverberating in my thoughts. His screams, and the blood-splattered walls, would haunt me forever. They now echo in the hollow corridors of my frayed sanity. A grim reminder of what this thing will take from me if I falter.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!